Committee will come to order. I would like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have a right to know that the money Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Good morning. I would like to welcome everybody to this hearing. The SIGAR report, document destruction and millions of dollars unaccounted for at the Department of Defense. Today's proceedings will continue the subcommittee's efforts to oversee the billions of dollars of taxpayer dollars spent in support of military and civilian operations in Afghanistan. On Monday, the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction released a report entitled, quote, Interim Report on Afghan National Army Petroleum, Oil, and Lubricants, end quote. This report provided the Secretary of Defense with an update of an audit concerning the Afghan National Army's logistics capability for petroleum, oil, and lubricants, also known as POL. POL are the most valuable commodities in the Afghan society. Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan, led by the United States military, is responsible for training and equipping the Afghan National Army. This effort is funded by the U.S. taxpayer through the Afghan Security Force Fund, ASFF. From fiscal years 2007 to 2012, SIGAR has provided approximately $1.1 billion in ASFF funding to purchase petroleum, oil, and lubricants for the Afghan National Army. In fiscal year 2013, the U.S. government will purchase roughly $343 million more in POL. SIGAR provides these commodities based on what it believes the Afghan National Army will need. In February of this year, the SIGAR began conducting this audit program. SIGAR, by the way, is Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. Its overall objective was to assess U.S. efforts to develop ANA's capabilities to acquire, distribute, and account for POL supplies to its forces. SIGAR's findings are extremely troubling. According to the interim report, SIGAR does not have an accurate or supportable information on how much of the U.S. funds are needed for ANA fuel, where and how the fuel is actually used, and how much fuel has been lost or stolen, some of the basic metrics that we would need in order to understand this situation. Thus, the extent to which ANA fuel is stocked, consumed, or lost at any given time remains unknown. SIGAR also found that, quote, no single office within the U.S. or Afghan government has complete records on ANA fuel purchased, ordered, delivered, or consumed, end quote. In fact, no records for fuel purchases exist prior to March 2011 because, quote, ANA fuel financial records totaling nearly $475 million from fiscal year 2007 to February 2011 had been shredded in violation of Department of Defense and Department of Army policies, end quote. This is totally unacceptable and fits a pattern of behavior from the Defense Department. We are also, as a subcommittee, concerned at the pattern of abuse of documents and the lack of documents coming out of the Pentagon in general. For instance, on January 1, 2011, Colonel Amrine sent an email to Colonels Carrozza and Anderson regarding a tasker to send information to the IG on Afghan General Yatali's suspected pilfering of Dawood hospital supplies. In that email, Colonel Amrine stated that, quote, Brigadier General Patton reviewed the summary and documentary evidence that we intended to provide. He made changes and told us to reduce documentary evidence that we provide, end quote. In the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan photo policy on September 12, 2011, a policy was issued instructing people to destroy documents that they had regarding the abuses of what was happening at the National Military Hospital known as Dawood. We had Colonel Geller's memorandum for the record that was requested. He submitted a 25-page memorandum for the record. Instead of providing that document to the committee, the Department of Defense created a separate chart, editing out some key parts before it presented it to the United States Congress. Colonel Geller was also prevented from speaking to the media. And then where the committee is also looking at the Palantir system, where the Department of Defense, and it's just stunning here, destroyed and replaced an independent assessment of an intelligence assessment tool, also known as Palantir, used and preferred by many of the soldiers in the field. We will continue to investigate that, and that will probably constitute its own hearing in the future. Nevertheless, we have a pattern here. This is not just one sole instance. But in this particular situation where we have the Inspector General going in trying to do an audit for a situation where they want to spend more money by the hundreds of millions of dollars, and to find that those documents had been shredded, lost, there's no accountability. I recognize that in the fog of war there are difficult situations, but this is totally unacceptable. Despite the lack of records and justification for fuel purchases, the Department of Defense proposes to increase funding. From fiscal year 2014 to fiscal year 2018, it plans to provide $555 million worth of POL per year. But instead of purchasing it for the Afghan National Army, this administration plans to give two-thirds of that amount in cash directly to the Afghan government. They might as well just wire it directly to Dubai. This is an absolute atrocity that this government is going to take American taxpayer dollars and just wire it directly to the Afghan government. We can't even control the money. We don't even know how much we're spending and what's going on. And now this government wants to send it directly to the Afghan government? Again, send it to Dubai and don't even bother. In the name of capacity building, the Afghans will be allowed to purchase POL for themselves. With that, the Afghan government will be responsible for overseeing the expenditure of roughly $2.8 billion of our taxpayer dollars. This to a government that I believe is perhaps the most corrupt government on the face of the planet. This begs one simple question. If the United States government can't track and verify these expenditures, then can we honestly expect the Afghan government to do better? Yesterday, this subcommittee held a hearing to examine the mismanagement, theft, and human suffering at the Dawood National Military Hospital in Afghanistan. For years, the Afghan officials pilfered nearly $175 million worth of cash and medical supplies. Legitimate pharmaceuticals were replaced with counterfeits, wounded Afghan soldiers were made to suffer, and in some cases died, without proper medical care. This was a U.S. taxpayer-funded program operated by the Afghan government. And this administration must rethink its so-called forward strategy. Now, I don't make this up. It's pretty stunning to me. This is not related to the campaign. This is why I had this. But if you look at the documents coming out of, for instance, USAID right now, it's USAID forward. I can't believe that a forward-thinking government, a forward-planning government would do such things as, quote, to achieve capacity-building objectives and using host country systems where it makes sense. In other words, let's just send them the money directly, bypass the accountability. We need more oversight, not less oversight. We can't even control the money ourselves, and we're going to wire by the hundreds of millions of dollars money to the Afghan government. That's part of the reason that we're here today. We are here today to discuss mechanisms needed to ensure accountability and start looking for answers such as who ordered the destruction of these documents and how we can improve the internal controls. Because without improvements, the ANA POL funds will be even more vulnerable to theft and waste. I want to thank Mr. Sopko for his being here on fairly short notice. They issued this report on Monday. We wanted to get on top of it as quickly as possible, and we look forward to his testimony. I'd like to now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Sopko, for being here today and for your report. So we've just marked the 11th anniversary of September 11th. During nearly all that time, United States soldiers have been on the ground in Afghanistan. We entered the conflict for what was believed to be righteous reasons, and our brave men and women in uniform have largely accomplished the mission of ridding Afghanistan of al-Qaeda and the international terrorists that threatened our homeland. I'd like to take the opportunity to honor their sacrifice and state that I am amongst many who are proud of their service. This subcommittee has long been concerned with the issues of corruption and mismanagement of United States taxpayer dollars in Afghanistan for the obvious reason of the impact it has on the safety and security of our forces, military forces and civilians in theater, but also with respect to the United States taxpayer dollars. Under my chairmanship, the subcommittee conducted multiple investigations into allegations of corruption in the United States contract related to the war in Afghanistan. In a bipartisan manner, we investigated jet fuel contracts in Kyrgyzstan and a host nation trucking contract in Afghanistan. Our investigation of the trucking contract found that contractors were making protection payments to our enemies with U.S. taxpayer dollars. I commend Chairman Chaffetz for calling this hearing today to examine the problem of contracting corruption continuing in Afghanistan. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction conducted an audit of the Afghan National Army's logistics capability for petroleum, oil, and lubricants. While conducting this audit, it was found that an astounding lack of internal controls and records of fuel purchases, deliveries, and consumption existed. SIGAR found that the Department of Defense's training mission lacked a valid method for estimating fuel needs on which to base the funding request, as well as lacked complete records on Afghan National Army's fuel transactions. Ultimately, this means that the fuel and the funds used to purchase it are highly vulnerable to theft and waste. Against this background, it is highly worrisome that the training mission intends to transfer to the Afghan government direct control of logistics and U.S. taxpayer funds for fuel on January 1, 2013. I believe that before this transfer takes place, NATO and the Department of Defense must work together to immediately establish clear guidelines to ensure that this money is not misused. It is imperative that these egregious issues be fixed before hundreds of millions of dollars go directly into the hands of the Afghan government. When the Chairman speaks of that quote that he was reading there about money not going to the locals where it makes sense, from what I can see, it clearly does not make sense, at least certainly not at this period of time. So that we have to be careful to make sure that not unless and until it makes sense should that transfer take place. So I appreciate Mr. Sopko's testimony and the leadership he brings to SIGAR. I look forward to the discussion today, and I thank you, Mr. Chairman, once again.
Thank you. I thank the gentleman for truly approaching this in a bipartisan way. We want what's right for the country. This is not a partisan issue, and I think you'll see us very united on this issue. So I do appreciate that. Does any other member have an opening statement? Gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, and I appreciate you holding this hearing. I want to thank you for focusing your attention on this, and I realize this is about the 5th hearing that this subcommittee has had on oversight in Afghanistan funding. This committee, along with the full committee, has worked tirelessly to ensure oversight and accountability of U.S. taxpayer dollars being spent in Afghanistan. And while it is a task we wish we were not needed, the reality is that corruption in Afghanistan is rampant and endemic. The subject of today's hearings demonstrates that there is still much more work to be done. Based on the Special Inspector General's interim report, the Combined Security Transition Command, Afghanistan, is not yet in a position to ensure that the Afghan National Army will be able to take over future procurement of petroleum, oil, and lubricants, POL. The report's findings are very disturbing. As the Chairman noted and the Ranking Member noted, nearly $475 million in fuel payments with no records, no documents, documents that have been shredded, and a lack of accurate methodology for estimating ANA fuel requirements has been uncovered by this Special Inspector General. I agree with the Special Inspector General that the deficiencies must be addressed quickly and correctly, especially as the ANA is slated to take charge of these purchases in 2013. As the Coalition continues to transfer responsibility for security and operations to the Afghans, we must be certain that procedures and institutions are in place to ensure that U.S. taxpayer money is not expended where Afghan resources are available, number one, and if and when U.S. resources are necessary, to make sure that those resources are expended properly. I would like to thank the Inspector General Sopko for your efforts to bring accountability to the continuing mission in Afghanistan and for taking the time to come and testify before this committee. I look forward to hearing your testimony on this matter and on other investigations your office is conducting. And I want to reinforce a couple of points that the Ranking Member and the Chairman have amplified, and that is that nothing in our experience thus far in Afghanistan would lead us to believe that direct funding, just sending a check, sending resources directly to Afghan ministries, is in the best interest of the United States or the American taxpayer. And secondly, I think because of look, it's a case of no good deed goes unpunished. We're trying to help the Afghan people. Meanwhile, there are agents within their government that are robbing us blind. And I just think that we have to reassess. I realize that the President some time ago set a timetable for 2014, the end of 2014, for withdrawal. But I think in light of the continuing circumstances of corruption, the delay in the training exercises that are ongoing there, I think it is right and proper for us to reassess that timetable. And actually, I believe that if our mission is for training the Afghan National Army and getting these systems in place, we don't need a massive military presence to accomplish that. And I think it is entirely right and appropriate that we reassess and look at the possibility of getting out at the end of 2013 instead of 2014. With the green on blue so-called attacks that we're seeing, where ANA personnel are attacking their NATO, largely U.S. trainers, I think there's every reason for us to reassess our timetable and look to the opportunity to get out of Afghanistan sooner. They are either going to take charge of this operation and run their country with the highest hopes for democratic ideals, or they're not. But this ball is in their court, and they've got to step up, and I don't see them stepping up. And I don't think us staying one more year and losing more American lives is going to change their level of commitment. Indeed, I think if we emphasize that we are not staying around, it might, in fact, act as a stronger incentive for them to step up and do the right thing. So, Mr. Chairman, and Ranking Member, I appreciate your courtesy and your indulgence, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record, and we'll now recognize our panel. Mr. John F. Sopko is the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction. He was appointed by President Obama, and was confirmed July 2nd, 2012. He spent more than 20 years on Capitol Hill, including Chief Counsel for Oversight Investigations for the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, chaired by Representative John Dingell. It's a distinguished career, and I appreciate, sir, your taking on this most difficult assignment. I know you're supported by a staff that's patriotic and committed to the betterment of this country. It's a difficult situation, to say the least, but we appreciate you and your staff and those that have joined you here today, and those back at the office and certainly in Afghanistan for the great work that they do, and appreciate you being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn in before they testify. If you would please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated, and let the record reflect that the witness answered in the affirmative. Mr. Sopko, we'd like to turn some time over to you for an opening statement. It will be followed by questions from members here on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Tierney, and the other members of the subcommittee. I'm pleased to be here today to discuss U.S. efforts to help the Afghan National Army procure, deliver, and account for fuel, which includes petroleum, oil, and lubricants provided to its forces. For fiscal years 2007 to 2012, U.S. funding for Afghan Army fuel totaled almost $1.1 billion. Because fuel is a valuable commodity that is vulnerable to theft, and because helping the Afghan Army develop a supportable and sustainable logistics capability is an essential part of transferring security responsibilities to the Afghan Army, SIGAR initiated an audit of efforts by the Combined Security Transition Command Afghanistan, or commonly referred to as CSTCA, to develop the Afghan Army's capability to supply fuel to its forces. Based on our ongoing audit work, we have serious concerns about this program and CSTCA's method for estimating fuel needs on which to base funding requests. We are also concerned that CSTCA has incomplete records of fuel purchased for, delivered to, and consumed by the Afghan Army. In fact, CSTCA was unable to provide us records on nearly $475 million in fuel payments because, according to CSTCA officials, those records had been shredded. Let me explain a bit about how the fuel ordering and delivery process is generally designed to work, as shown in his first chart with fuel procurement and distribution. And I believe that you do have an electronic record of that chart. In that chart, you'll see that Afghan Army units at the bottom are supposed to submit a fuel request to the fuel depot, which is request number 14 that we discuss in my longer statement. The depot is supposed to fill that order and, when needed, request fuel through the Afghan Logistics Command to maintain its supply. The Afghan Logistics Command approves the depot's request and is supposed to submit it to SIGAR. SIGAR is then supposed to review the order and submit it to one of 4 fuel contractors to deliver to the designated Afghan Army location. Once the fuel is delivered, the Afghan Army unit completes a receiving report showing the amount and quality of fuel received and submits that form to both the Logistics Command and SIGAR. SIGAR then will use this form along with the original fuel order and delivery ticket and other supporting records provided by the fuel delivery contractor to approve payment. That's what's supposed to happen. SIGAR's ability to accurately protect itself from fraud and theft, as well as to develop Afghan fuel logistics capability, depends on the effective implementation of these required processes to validate the accuracy of data related to fuel orders, receipts, payments, and ultimately overall Afghan Army fuel requirements. Unfortunately, SIGAR's auditors have found that the process I just described is seriously broken, and SIGAR does not know the actual fuel funding levels needed to meet Afghan Army mission requirements. As you can see in the second chart, SIGAR's current method for estimating the amount of fuel the Afghan Army needs does not include basic information that any household here in the United States or small business would want, such as, how many vehicles are there that require fuel? That would be an obvious question to ask. How many generators are there that require fuel? How much fuel does each generator require? How many Afghan Army fuel storage locations are there? How much fuel can be stored at each location? And ultimately, how much fuel has been consumed at each of the Afghan Army locations? We are also concerned that our audit found that there is no single office in the United States Army, Defense Department, or to the Afghan Ministry of Defense that has complete records on Army fuel ordered, purchased, delivered, or consumed. Moreover, as mentioned by the Chairman in his opening, we found that SIGAR did not have any records of fuel purchase and payment information prior to March of 2011 because they had been mysteriously shredded. For the time period that they claimed they had records, which is March 2011 to March 2012, SIGAR could not provide more than half of the documents we requested. And SIGAR continued to pay vendors without independent verification of the quantity and quality of fuel delivered. As a matter of fact, we only received 4 complete set of documents when we requested all the material from SIGAR. These problems must be resolved quickly, because SIGAR plans to begin transferring responsibility for the procurement, tracking, delivery, and accounting of fuel to the Afghan government beginning January 2013, less than 4 months from now. At that time, SIGAR intends to begin paying for the Afghan Army's fuel through direct contributions to the Afghan government. In addition, SIGAR has proposed to increase annual funding for Afghan fuel for fiscal years 2014 to 2018 by $212 million per year. We believe there is no basis for that increase. To address the serious problems we identified, we issued this interim audit report and made 2 recommendations to the Commanding General for SIGAR. First, reduce the fiscal 2013 and planned 2014 budget requests for fuel to the fiscal 2012 amount of $306 million, and maintain that level until a better process for determining requirements is developed. And secondly, develop, approve, and implement a comprehensive action plan to improve fuel accountability. I also took the following steps. I alerted the senior leadership at DoD and the commanders in the field about the destruction of documents and emphasized the importance of maintaining all financial records, which are required by law. Second, I referred this matter to my investigative directorate, which is conducting an inquiry right now to determine who destroyed the documents and for what reason. Thirdly, I have just launched a new audit to assess SIGAR's efforts to develop the ability of the Afghan National Police to procure, deliver, and account for fuel for its forces. Although SIGAR agreed with our second recommendation that it needs to improve its process, it disagreed with our first recommendation and still intends to increase fuel funding for the Afghan Army and make direct contributions to the Afghan Ministry of Defense starting in January 2013. We continue to believe this is a mistake. It would be imprudent for SIGAR to increase estimated fuel requirements and to proceed with writing a blank check to the Afghan government without first ensuring it is obtaining and using basic information such as actual fuel consumption and usage data. To do so would be doubling down on a very, very risky bet. In summary, no single commodity is as important to the reconstruction effort in Afghanistan as fuel, and no commodity is at such risk of being stolen or wasted as fuel. In Afghanistan, fuel is like gold. As the United States withdraws and transfers security responsibility to Afghan forces, U.S.-funded fuel will become even more vulnerable to waste, fraud, and abuse through corruption and theft. It is imperative that U.S. military and civilian authorities improve their efforts to protect the U.S. taxpayers' continuing investment and to ensure that the Afghan Army is capable of assuming their responsibilities in the future. I want to thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for holding this hearing and giving us the opportunity to discuss these findings. We believe they warrant immediate attention. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Best estimate is that the documents were shredded sometime between October 2010 and March of 2011. Do I have that right?
What we know is when we first found this out that a fuel ordering officer advised us that some former fuel ordering officers had destroyed the records. And the time period would be October 2006 to March 2011.
The commanding general of SIGAR between November 2009 and November 2011 was, I believe, Lieutenant General Caldwell, correct?
I believe you are correct, sir.
This is a pattern of destruction of documents under his command that I find personally to be of deep concern, and it's something we should continue to look at. There certainly had to be some sort of electronic records. I mean, this day and age, in the 2000s, there had to be some sort of electronic record, was there not?
Well, Mr. Chairman, we, as I mentioned, learned about this in April of 2012, and I believe the auditors kept looking for these records. We assumed there had to be an electronic, some records saved in an electronic format, and it wasn't until, I believe, July, late June or July, that finally SIGAR told us that if you haven't gotten it, you're not going to get it. We couldn't find any electronic records. Now, there may be electronic records of the actual payment. As we say, we know how much we paid, but that doesn't tell us anything else. That just tells us how much we may have lost.
Tell me about disbarment. I mean, certainly there's some bad actors in this category of fuel consumption. Has anybody been disbarred? How is that process working? We
have a very aggressive, and I without sounding like I'm tooting my horn, I think one of the more aggressive suspension and debarment programs, and particularly in that field. The area in Afghanistan, of course, is where we're looking. We have referred 242 companies and individuals for suspension and debarment. Unfortunately, a number of the companies and individuals that we have identified as subject to debarment and suspension have not been suspended and debarred by the Army. They have, despite the fact that we have provided thousands of pages of analysis, witness statements, and other documents as part of multiple debarment proceedings of field contractors, we're basically being forced to prove a negative. And by that I mean, Mr. Chairman, we have signed affidavits, we have statements from U.S. officers and employees who are saying that the records with their signature on are false, that they did not sign those documents, but the Army is saying, well, unless you prove that the fuel didn't actually go to the military base for the Afghans, we're not going to suspend and debar.
Any of these suspected terrorists or known terrorists?
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's a very good question. We have identified 42 companies and individuals who have been listed by either the Department of Commerce on their entities list, which is published in the Code of Federal Regulations, and at least 8 of those who have been publicly listed on pursuant to Section 841 of the National Defense Authorization Act, which deals with contracting with the enemy. Those individuals have been publicly identified. We've brought their names and the names of those companies to the Army, and they haven't been debarred. We view this as just ridiculous. They should be debarred immediately. They're listed by the United States government as terrorists, but at the same time, they're able to contract with the United States government right now in Afghanistan.
So of these hundreds of people and entities that you've identified as qualified for debarment, do you have any idea what percentage have actually been accomplished, and why is the Army not doing this? What's their justification for that?
Well, they just line us up in the queue with everybody else. In the queue now for the Army, it takes about a year.
We used to have some intern sitting in some cubicle somewhere that doesn't have enough time to get this done, or what's the problem?
My concern, Mr. Chairman, is that they don't appreciate, I think, what you appreciate and what I do, that time is of the essence. If we're going to make a difference and stop bad people from contracting with the U.S. government, from stopping terrorists from contracting with the U.S. government, now's the time. Not 2 years or 3 years from now. I've told my staff since I started, the next 2 years, if we're going to make a difference for the U.S. government, for the U.S. taxpayer, we have to redouble our efforts. Now, I'm not absolutely certain that everyone has that message. It's business as usual in a lot of government agencies. Now, I know there are people such as General Allen, and I know General Longo, and the people in Task Force 2010 out there in the field who realize now is the time is of the essence. And I'm not commenting on them, but I think there are too many people here in Washington who think this is business as usual. It is not business as usual. We're in a war, and if we're going to do something, we've got to do it now.
Well, thank you. My time has expired, but given that we've been there for more than 10 years, we haven't got this part right yet. With all due respect to General Allen and the great patriot he is, if they can't take this seriously and can't get these people on a list, and it takes years to get it done, it's just an atrocity, and I appreciate you highlighting it. There's somebody here who's done a lot of work on this particular topic and has been a champion in trying to get this thing fixed, and I appreciate his heart in this. Now I recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Subco. This is outrageous, to say the least, but it's not new to us. I mean, when we looked into the contracting of the oil coming from Kyrgyzstan, through Kyrgyzstan on that, one of the things we found out was that the Department of Defense didn't really even know really who they were contracting with. They had a corporation. They didn't know the principals. They didn't know the stockholders. They didn't know the directors. And I'm afraid we're looking at more of that here. Let me first deal with the shredding issue. We need a resolution of that. So you've already got an investigation that's going on. You said 2009 through 2011, General Caldwell was in charge. Who was in charge from 2007 to 2009?
I don't have the name of the general at that time. I can check, and let me just see if my staff has it.
Okay, we can find that.
We can get back to you with that information.
That's good. But so the question is, was this an ongoing destruction of documents during that 2007 to 2011 period, or did it all happen at one time?
That is what we're trying to determine, and we're also trying to determine who did it and was it ordered.
Right. Was it a policy or was it a personal decision? That's
it
what we need to know.
It could have been done on the personal. We don't know that yet.
Okay. So those are the things we have to find out.
Absolutely.
Right. Who destroyed it? Was it done as a matter of policy or some personal decision? And that's the status of the investigation. Is just beginning or in the?
It's just beginning, sir.
Okay. Second thing is that I think that we're all hesitant to start turning over millions and millions of dollars to the Afghan National Army if they don't have a process of accountability on that. And I don't know, the Chairman and I are going to talk about what we do between now and the end of next week to stop something from going in on January and that. But I agree with you. First of all, why are we giving them extra money if they can't justify the need for it? And from what I'm hearing from you is they've not shown us any justification for that substantial increase. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's some $212 million per year that they want to give additionally without any documentation or substantiation.
That is correct. What I would refer to it, Mr. Tierney, is that it's basically garbage in and garbage out. Mm-hmm. The basis, it's not based on anything credible. The current number, and we're even giving them that current number of $306 million, because they don't know how much is being used. But definitely not going to the out years of increasing it.
All right. So $306 million hasn't been justified either.
That's correct, sir, because they are basing it on order data, what they order as the basis for usage. They don't have consumption data. Okay. You're basically, it's like your teenager goes out, uses the car, and he says, I need $60 to fill up the gas tank, and I need another $100, I need $200, and nobody checks the gas tank.
Yeah, we've seen this before. This actually, but look, so we've got to act between now and January on that. So the preconditions should be exactly what before we start releasing money to the ANA, Afghan National Army, to distribute it. We should have some system in place, and you've outlined the system over here, but should we not have some period of time in which they're actually performing to that system before we feel comfortable that they have the capacity, independent of the United States, to actually carry out this system and implement it properly, and also need the records to show us what the actual numbers are before we even give them the $306 million.
That's correct, Congressman. The thing you have to realize is SIGAR is a U.S. and NATO organization. Mm-hmm. What we're finding is not only aren't the Afghans living up to their own rules and procedures, but SIGAR isn't. So how can we hold the Afghans and assume the Afghans can do it if SIGAR doesn't even do it?
Look, we had problems with SIGAR with regard to the training of the Afghan National Army and whether or not they were doing the job they should have been done there. We had issues with them with respect to the tracking of weapons on that. We had weapons coming into the airport and no tracking between getting off, unloaded on the plane, getting to the warehouse, no tracking between the warehouse and getting to the trucks that were delivering, no records between the trucks delivering to the final point of return, and weapons were showing up in all sorts of places on that. So SIGAR has, unfortunately, a long-standing issue here of accountability. My question to you, I guess, is what is reasonable to expect that can be done between now and January 2013, or is it just a fool's errand and we ought not to start delivering directly at all and to find some other system until we can get enough of a record and enough proof of their capacity to perform?
I am not certain that SIGAR can remedy the problems in this short a time frame. They are making some attempts, but as we say in the audit, they still are not basing and grounding this on common sense. You have to have the records, you have to check what consumption is, and you have to check that the fuel is going to where it's being ordered. This is just reason and common sense. And I'm not absolutely certain they can do it.
as you read it, the directive to do all this by January 2013 is just something that the Army has set as a date, or is it some regulation that's in fact in place?
It is our understanding, and I will check with my staff who are probably more knowledgeable about this, but it is our understanding that that is the stated policy and it will occur. And not just for SIGAR and not just for petroleum oil and fuel. It's going to be with a number of programs. But let me just double check.
That's Department of Defense policy, you're saying?
That is my understanding.
Okay.
DoD policy? Yeah. It's a DoD plan and policy.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, thank you. You've been liberal with your time.
The gentleman yields back. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Inspector Subco, I want to thank you for your work on this. Can I ask you, in terms of what we're paying for fuel in Afghanistan through the vendor process, what are we paying a gallon for gas?
I believe we are paying $4 per gallon, but again, I will double check. Approximately $4 per gallon.
That's supposedly at the pump, right? At the point of purchase? Or?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, I understand the challenges that SIGAR has. I noticed, from our previous trips, and we've all made numerous trips to Afghanistan, the recruits that we're getting in training, candidates for training, are largely illiterate. They don't enumerate. I guess they don't have numeracy. They don't know how to count. So we're actually going through a program right now where we take these trainees and we put them through a program that takes them to a third grade equivalent, third grade level U.S. What troubles me greatly is that the people that are supposed to be teaching the Afghans, as you pointed out, SIGAR, the proper way, the proper methodology for accounting for this fuel and paying for it and running this system. SIGAR is not using the system that we should be trying to teach these trainees, these candidates, these people are running the operation and that are supposed to be running it themselves beginning in 2013. So there's a real gap in our mission. As I understand, most of the prior accounting is just a paper process. Is there any ability to adopt through our own system or through DCAA, the Defense Contracting Auditing Agency, a system that might be able to be put in place before January?
I don't believe so, sir. It is a paper process. I've seen the tickets. They're just like your old tickets. I remember working in the steel mills when I was a kid, and there'd be these little tickets when you bought something, and it'd be 4 or 5 copies. You pull one off, you give it to the driver takes it, he pulls another one off, fills it in. I think to institute in 3 months an electronic process would be extremely difficult.
Yeah.
The problem is, as you alluded to, we should be leading by example. And SIGAR isn't following their own rules. They're allowing the purchases to go directly to SIGAR. They're supposed to go through that process. There's supposed to be forms. There should be a package together before SIGAR makes the payment, but they're not.
Yeah. We've had similar problems with the banking system. It got so bad that because of the theft, largely by folks related to Hamid Karzai, related to the first Vice President, and they basically robbed Kabul Bank. It came to a point we had to redirect our payments to vendors away from the Afghan banks so that they wouldn't be stealing our money. This is a lot of the same problem. I said yesterday at the hearing that corruption as to Afghanistan is like wet is to water. We've got some serious problems here, and we can't let this continue. We can't let this go forward in January. We can't just send them a check. because we know they're going to steal it. We know they're overcharging us. We don't have any basis for what they're, I read in this report that they're even ordering fuel for trailers that don't have engines, that don't use fuel. So they're ordering, they're basing their fuel consumption based on trailers that don't use fuel. That troubles me greatly. Again, we're trying to do the right thing. The American people have been very supportive of this operation. I think they're rightfully running out of patience. And I'm just trying to figure a way to minimize our losses here and bring some accountability to this process. And it does boggle the mind that we have been there 10 years, and we don't have a system in place to verify, how much money they're, how much fuel they're using, and whether or not they're using the resources that we're giving them for that purpose. And it's disgraceful. We cannot afford this. We never could afford this, but we certainly can't afford it now. And I appreciate your good work. I think at some point we're going to have to get over there, and look into this more deeply, part of the committee over in Afghanistan. How many auditors do you have on the ground through your operation?
We have a total in Afghanistan. Total auditors in Afghanistan. We have 49 positions totally. That includes criminal investigators and auditors, and we have approximately 25. Since I came on board, I've asked for approval from the State Department to increase the number by 8. Since you've been there, there's limited space, but we feel, again, if we're going to make a difference, we got to emphasize the next 2 years. So we're going to increase that total number to about 57, 58 people.
And my last question in closing, we've got the vehicle requirements, but then we have some power plants. Plants that are consuming large amounts of fuel. I mean, it would seem with a fixed facility as opposed to vehicles that are moving around, and you can't really track consumption on that end as well as you can with a fixed facility. Can we at least put people in place at these power plants so that we can audit their fuel consumption?
We do have some people in place, the auditors found, but the problem again is we're not collecting the data.
Yeah, well, it should be possible because 92% of the country has no electricity. Yeah. Basically, it's 8% of the population right in and around Kabul that have electricity for some part of the day. We should be able to go in there and audit, those limited facilities that are actually producing the electricity.
Well, these facilities that are producing electricity are basically producing electricity for a military base.
Generators.
They're generators. They're large diesel-powered generators, you would see. And I just wanted to clarify one thing. When you made the reference to the trailers, that came up not so much in the ordering issue, but that came up when we asked SIGAR to justify their budget. They gave us information, and when we looked behind the information they gave us, they were counting trailers and other equipment that had no engines to justify it. And we said that doesn't fly. And so it was more in that context. We have not confirmed actual fuel going to non-working engines, but of course we don't know where the fuel goes.
Right.
All we really know is what we pay the vendor. And after that, it's basically Katie bar to door.
Okay. I've exceeded my time. I appreciate your indulgence, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I recognize myself for 5 minutes. It mentions in your report that the U.S. military is spending $20 million for firewood. Is there any justification for $20 million in Afghan firewood?
Mr. Chairman, that was one of the more interesting comments my auditor told me, is that you're absolutely correct. We are paying, SIGAR is paying approximately $20 million a year for firewood. And when my auditors asked for documentation of what we spent on firewood, we were basically told, quote unquote, we don't have the records, we just spend the money. And that's the SIGAR attitude. Now, that's a lot of firewood. Somebody joked that, that's like buying every stick of lumber in Maine. Again, it's an attitude, we just pay. And that's what is shocking. Now,
one of the things, obviously, there's some bribery going on here. We'd be naive to think that there wasn't. Do you have any sense of how that happens? What the going rate is? I mean, how much are these people being paid off?
Well, again, it's difficult for us to do criminal investigations in this arena because there are no records, and it's going to even be more difficult if we just cut a blank check. But in other programs that we have looked at, in programs related to, I believe, some of the host nation trucking cases that I referred to that Mr. Tierney and you investigated before, we have records. We've done criminal investigations. We actually have 25 fuel-related investigations currently underway, which has resulted in a number of indictments. But the going rate we're seeing is about $5,000 per truck to make trucks disappear. And we have one case in which approximately 200-some trucks just disappeared. And by that I mean is somebody made up the records. There actually is paper records. They just made them up. They were paid $5,000, so it's about $1,000 a gallon. And the trucks went out the door, never to be seen again. And so that's over 1 million gallons in fuel, and nobody noticed it until we opened the criminal investigation. And I must say again, we have very strong support from the military in this matter, and they've been very helpful, and we've been working jointly with them and Task Force 2010 on these type of cases. But those are cases where we actually have records. We don't have records over at CSTICA.
Can't just go down to Office Max and buy a few laptops and get a little software and be out the door by 3 p.m. and I got to tell you, I really appreciate highlight that. I say that with a little smile on my face. But after 10 years, and for CSTICA, for the Pentagon to suggest that we should increase spending to $555 million per year, and from 2014 to 2018, $2.8 billion, that they want to increase the funding and just allow that and send a bulk of this directly to the Afghan government with less control, less oversight, less accountability. It's just absolutely stunning that the total lack of regard for the resources and the money that the American people are spending, and then to spend $20 million on firewood with no accountability. I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention. But we in Congress have to step up and do something about this because this is totally unacceptable. I have no further questions, but I'm happy to yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Thank you. I mean, I suspect we're beating a dead horse at this stage. You've made a very compelling and clear case, and I thank you for that. I guess we need to define what the role of the Afghan National Army is versus the role of the CSTICA situation on that. Is the role of the contractors prominent in this documentation? They basically document the amount that they pick up and the amount that they deliver, or where do they fit into this, the people that are?
They are supposed to, Mr. Tierney, but since we don't have the records,
you don't know if they
we don't know. I mean, they're supposed to, and we have some records that we've seen, and what it is it's again showing that they picked up so much fuel. What made us suspicious, and again, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I got my start looking at corrupt unions in Ohio where records disappeared all the time, or there were bogus records. I've seen that. I did banking investigations. There's plenty of that. But what you see here is perfect. Sometimes these are pristine records. They're typed out. It's just there's no spillage. Everything is perfect. But that raises some concern, and the fact that in most of the cases there are no records.
Okay.
So
we don't know the amount that wasn't delivered. We don't know the amount that was delivered, but in insufficient amounts from what left the depot, and we don't know the grade or quality, whether it was doctored, altered, watered down, or anything else. We're unable to indicate all of that.
The key point is we don't know what was consumed. So
Right.
How do we know what we should be buying?
Okay. Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, and the attitude, we don't have the records. We just spend the money. You know, that's permeates, unfortunately, too much of what's going on, not just in Sticker, but I think in the whole operation over there, and how we intend to protect our troops and get to an end result of this thing with the level of corruption where the people from Afghanistan can't even trust their own leadership on that or distinguish between what's happening to them at the hands of insurgents and other malfeasant characters in their own government is not helping our operation at all. Thank you, Mr. Subco. I suspect that we may be talking to your office or whatever, and because I've started conversations with the chairman here about something that maybe we could do between now and the end of this session to stop this from being implemented forward in the way it looks like it's heading.
Well, we are happy to work with you, and the chairman, and any other members on this issue or other issues.
This is the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch. Is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you, Mr. Subco. Have you been invited to testify before Defense Appropriations?
No, sir.
Yeah.
Now, I've only been on the job since July 1st, so I haven't
Yeah,
had
we might want to cycle you through Defense Appropriations because, you know, I think they'd be they'd have the benefit of your counsel. I think that would be great. Okay, so we know none of these records are being established, or either that or they're not being created or they're being shredded. What is the situation now with Sticker? Based on your contact with them, have they changed their behavior at all? Is there a statement of future compliance? What are they doing?
They are, as you see in the report, their comments, they are starting to change, but we don't feel it's going fast enough. We don't think it's focusing on the most critical records, and those are usage records. And we don't feel, based upon our last request for records, in which they only could provide 50% of the records, that everybody's following the rules and regulations. And I should say that they told us, well, don't worry, those records were shredded, but now we're keeping records. So we did a statistical sample, and it came back that 50% of the records were gone. And no explanation of what happened. We don't know if those were destroyed, those were lost, or they didn't collect them. So we may go back in again. We are going to be spending time looking at how Sticker is doing the same program for the police, and we may be able to report back to you on that. But I'm not optimistic.
Okay. Well, we'd like to work with you, maybe even as so far as to getting over to Afghanistan again and doing a walkthrough with your folks, just to drill down on this a little bit.
We would love to. We'd love to do that.
Okay. Thank you. I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're complete with our questions. I just wanted to give you one more opportunity. I guess I would ask a little bit of a question. Are there other categories or other major expenditures that we should also be on our radar? You mentioned the police, but if there are other big major ticket items, even smaller ticket items, I guess, like firewood and others that are on your radar, I'd appreciate knowing that. And then if there's something else that you'd care to share with us, otherwise we will conclude we'll conclude the hearing.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you again for giving me this opportunity to talk about this really important issue. Since coming on board, as I said, I just started July 1st. I've emphasized, after talking to a number of policy people, that we're going to have to increase our audits and increase our investigations, and we're going to have to do them faster and be smarter, because we have a limited amount of time because of the security situation in Afghanistan. Accordingly, we are coordinated with the other IGs, and we're looking at a number of very serious issues. We're going to be looking at how security is impacting our programs by USAID and the Defense Department. How are we going to monitor contracts when there are going to be fewer American troops there is a big issue for us. We are also going to do a number of capping reports looking at broader issues dealing with corruption, counter-narcotics activities, as well as looking at the food services that Sticker provides and food as part of this to the Afghan National Security Forces. Since about approximately 50% of the reconstruction money now is going to the Afghan National Security Forces, that is obviously going to be a key place where we're going to emphasize our resources, although we're open to suggestions from other interested parties. The last thing I want to mention in regards to this is, and we discussed suspension and debarment, and I don't want to leave the impression that the generals in the field have authority to suspend and debar. So when I mentioned General Allen or General Longo, they would love to have the authority to suspend and debar, but they can't either. They have to send, if they find suspicious characters, they have to send it to Army here in Washington for suspension debarment. So it's not no accusation against the generals and the people in the field. They are actually with us, are probably the best people to know who are the bad guys and who we should suspend and debar. But they don't have that authority, nor do we, which is ironic because you have the National Endowment for the Arts has suspension and debarment authority, but the commander in the field doesn't. The Institute of Museum and Library Services, I have a whole list. They all have suspension and debarment authority. The Railroad Retirement Board, the National Endowment for Humanities, the Legal Services Corporation, they all have, the National Archives has suspension and debarment authority. But General Allen doesn't, General Longo doesn't, and we don't. And I think it's something to consider, particularly in a war. You know, we're a temporary agency. We're disappearing at the end of this. But a commander in the field should have authority to stop trading with the enemy and basically say we're debarring you. But he doesn't have that authority, or she doesn't have that authority. So I'd ask you to consider that as you consider this very important issue on suspension and debarment.
Thank you. I have a second piece of legislation I'll be introducing, so thank you. Listen, great work. We appreciate, again, the service that so many of the men and women within your organization do. It's very difficult. We all appreciate this and appreciate the report. And at this time, the committee will stand in adjournment.